And so the next thing I'm going to do is report on the Land Surface Modeling Summit. So many of you have probably heard about it, and several of you were there. Polly was there, Charlie was there, Daniel was there, Forrest was there. And so the idea between, so this was the steering committee, the idea between the Land Surface Modeling Summit was sort of this, is that, land and earth system models are increasingly being asked to provide information on the societally relevant impacts and adaptation associated with climate and environmental change. And so this is the same kind of sets of questions, which I showed on my last presentation, which I show in almost every presentation, understanding ecosystem vulnerability, water and food security, land-based mitigation solutions, hazard prediction. People want to know actionable information about these things. And in most cases, our land models, while they're getting increasingly complex and increasingly capable of trying to address these questions, we would also have strong reservations in providing, information coming out of the models directly because of all the uncertainties like the parameters and that we talked about here. So I like this example on the bottom right here. We, really, motivating, we must get a grip on forest science before it's too late. Trees are our big hope. Supporting the scientists who are looking into understanding trees is really important. And I think that's totally fits, that really captures what's going on, is that we are trying to build models like FATES to be able to address these questions in a way that we feel like we could hang our hat on. So models have been getting more complex. I don't need to necessarily go through all this here. This analogy that Will has created, it's getting more and more complex, and as they get more and more complex, they're difficult to manage, they're more difficult to understand, but they're also more relevant. And so, how do we deal with that? And then, at the same time, we're trying to involve more and more communities into the building of these models. I like this figure from Emily Kiker-Snowman, this paper that was published late last year. It was sort of describing the pathway of what it takes for somebody like an ecologist who has taken an observation or set of observations out in the field and is trying to understand how their new understanding of the world can be folded into an Earth system model. And the pathway is really complicated. I'm not going to go through the whole thing here. You can read the paper, and most of you are already familiar with it. But it's a really difficult thing to do, especially because our models are in a situation where we can't provide sufficient support for people to do this. They're so complex. So the growing partnerships between modeling centers and the academic stakeholder communities, I think, are proving fruitful. So, this is happening, Rubisco is an example, but more and more people are trying to use these models. And it's really useful. Whenever somebody new uses the model, they expose limitations to the model, right? Like I said, if a new group comes in and says, I want to study problem A, and they run the model and it doesn't look anything like the real world, we have to then figure out how to address that. And, I use this analogy. I was trying to use this figure down here, which is a GitHub, header page for CTSM, just to make the point that, the number of issues, open issues in CTSM at the time I made this was 511, right? It's a massive number. And the number of open pull requests is 30. And I'm sure it's the same for most modeling groups around the world. We're basically under this intense strain. And so can we keep operating the way we have been and still make progress? And I think that's why we got together, is to ask that question. Are there things we can do better as a community, a land modeling community, to help us accelerate progress? So the formal goals of the summit, and here at the summit, just for people to know, is that we had about 85 people, minus the 5 people from the Met Office who couldn't come because the Queen had died and they were in official mourning, unfortunately, which is unfortunate for them and unfortunate for us. But the formal goals of the meeting were to, create a roadmap to address the challenges, to, increase and accelerate the improvement of land models so they are fit for purpose to address these scientific and societal needs. And then the subtext there is that we need to produce overview and technical reports, manuscripts that can be used to build collaborations and also to solicit funding. If we're being honest here, this all comes down to money. That allows us to support development activities to build this community effort to accelerate progress. Informal goals is to develop a shared understanding of the pain points in modern land model development. Like I just mentioned, the 511 open issues and how to manage that. And also to foster collaborative relationships to address these challenges. So the model groups represented was, 10 of the leading land models around the world. And we had about 5 members from each team, plus global experts around the room. I thought the meeting was super fun. I'm biased. I was organizing it, and part of it is coming out of COVID, but there was certainly, I think, an energy in that room that I haven't experienced too much recently, and probably only a few times in my career, of people being like so happy to be able to say, oh, we're really just going to talk about our problems that we're dealing with in an open way. We're not all sitting here bragging about how great our model is. We very explicitly did not include any session about, how good is your model? What are your plans for the future? We're going to the assumption that all our models are good in some places, worse in others, and all of us are working towards the same common goals, basically developing the models in similar, if not not identical, but similar ways. So we skipped over all that kind of time. And then instead we had, some sessions on describing where we were at in terms of, our parameterization development. We looked at hydrology, nutrients, carbon cycle, droughts, floods, all these sort of key aspects of our models, and sort of got a review. But then we spent most of our time with a lead-off presentation and breakout sessions where we're trying to, probe into the technical problems. So, what are the challenges associated with subgroup heterogeneity? What are the challenges associated with managing model complexity? Charlie and Rosie bring this up a lot. Are there prospects towards the ability to share modules across land surface models so that we don't all have to, do the same thing 10 different times, 12 different times across all our modeling centers? Can we do shared knowledge about input and forcing data sets? We're spending a lot of time, bringing in new observational estimates of soil texture and glacier distribution and whatever. And do we all need to do that independently? Obviously, the forcing data sets that just came up. Questions around humans, which is increasingly important and really challenging in terms of data set availability, and just a huge number of processes you got to include. So looking at crop modeling and forestry, water and land management, coupling to external models, fire and humans. And then finally, a session on, land data science, land model benchmarking, where obviously ILM was part of the discussion, machine learning approaches and LSMs, and parameter estimation uncertainty. And the goals of the breakouts was to identify collaborative steps or activities that could be taken to accelerate progress. And one thing we tried to do is ask participants, to think about it in terms of money. I know it's kind of unfortunate to think about things in money, but, if you were going to do something, what are things you could do for no cost? Have a meeting or a small, online meeting. What would be inexpensive? Host a small workshop, or bigger, more expensive, or write a paper, or bigger, more expensive, medium cost, where you host a workshop or a hackathon. And then what we call the super league, like what takes a lot of money, say a $5 million effort to really work across groups. So recordings of the presentations are all available from the conference webpage. I know some people have watched the recordings and have appreciated the opportunity to see. I think the quality of the presentations was quite high. We had dinner at Hogwarts, which was fun. Conference dinner, and there's a joke from that picture on the up right there that it looked like Eleanor and I in the middle there were getting married. It did feel a little bit like that. We spent so much time together in the weeks and months leading up to this and during the meeting itself, but no, we are not married. So coming out of it, and I'm about done here, is that people were fired up at the end. I thought it would be one of those meetings where everyone tails off at the end and nobody kind of can muster the energy to try to identify next steps. But actually, the last session was among the most animated. And one thing that came out of it was we decided we would like to propose the formation of something we're currently calling the International Land Modeling Forum. And this is a new forum which we're going to create, which we're hoping the land modeling community can share ideas, promote workshops, form working groups, advertise jobs to advance specific collaborative projects. And so we've had a steering committee that was made up of the LSMS steering committee, and then some other members that were at the meeting who were pretty vocal and had a lot of good ideas. And so our near-term activities then are to create that LMF, and we're trying to figure out what exactly the platform should look like. And then a high-level commentary for like Nature that outlines the important society relevant needs from advanced land models. It was, at the end, we said the fundamental questions are really clear, and we can contribute to that. Where are we going to grow our food? Where are we going to get our water? And where is the carbon going to go? These are fundamental, important, critical societal questions that we can use land models to address. Of course, they're big, essentially unanswerable questions. So we need to come up with something a little bit more fine-grained than that. but also then identify the scientific and technical barriers that need to be overcome to feel like we can confidently address these questions. We'd also like to produce a detailed roadmap that kind of gets into the technical details here. And then we want to start very soon the formation of working groups to try to work together on a few things. And we've identified 4 activities that we can start with. One is evaluate and implement shareable modules, focusing initially on maybe 1 or 2 examples across different land domains. I like to use the example of phenology as a possibility. It's a relatively, process that can be pulled out and kind of kept on its own. It's something we don't do very well. It's something we could maybe all work together on. We'd like to develop a database and shared knowledge on input and forcing data sets. Also, that shouldn't be too hard to do. Determine new data sets and needs and pathways to better integrate humans into land models. So this is sort of an activity of discussions with the LUH group and integrated assessment models. And then develop shared methods related to parameter uncertainty assessment and estimation based on the work I just showed. Not based on, but possibly deriving from the work I just showed. And then, of course, there's these other international coordinating bodies like AIMS and LEAPS and GBEX and GLASS that can provide complementary expertise. And we don't want to like step on their toes. We want to provide, the ability actually for those groups who make, understandings, new scientific knowledge to feed back into the land modeling groups through the ILMF. So I will stop there and take any questions or comments.